This archivist, someone with decades buried deep in forgotten county records, in the dustiest corners of state historical societies, he didn't just find a document. He found the document. And they knew it. They moved swiftly. First, the phone calls. Soft offers. Then, the promotion. A directorship. A 7-figure grant to further his research, a grant tied, of course, to an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Their ultimate goal? To make that ledger disappear. To have it shredded, dissolved, its existence wiped clean from any official log. But he didn't take the bait. He made copies. He slipped fragments to trusted sources, to those of us still digging, still clawing at the earth where truth was buried. What he unearthed, what I can now show you, will not just rewrite your understanding of American power. It will give you the precise, undeniable evidence to shatter denial forever. It will unmask the historical revisionist industry, expose the legacy families whose fortunes are built on unacknowledged crimes, and reveal the rot festering within the very state archives that are still locked, still guarded, still protecting the comfortable lie. Listen. You've felt it, haven't you? That ghost. That whisper of something wrong. You walk down a street, past a gleaming bank, a manicured park, a prestigious university, and a chill goes down your spine. You know, instinctively, that something precious was torn down, stolen, buried, for this. You've heard the hushed stories from your elders, the fragments of a massacre, a riot, a neighborhood wiped clean off the map, a family name scrubbed from every census. You search for it. You truly try. But it's never there. Not in the textbooks. Not on the official plaques. Just a void. An empty space where history should be. I remember the first time I felt that cold, dismissive wall. I was looking into the Great Fire of 1903 in my grandmother's hometown. A small, vibrant black district, utterly destroyed. The official story, an accidental kitchen grease fire. But my grandmother, she always said it wasn't an accident. She said the fire trucks just watched. She said white men stood on the edge of the blaze, laughing. So I went to the local historical society, a grand old building filled with polished wood and hushed reverence. I asked the curator, a woman with tight gray hair and an even tighter smile, about the black business district before the fire. About the victims. About any inquiries into the fire's origin beyond the official line. She adjusted her glasses. Oh, yes, she chirped, a tragic accident. A terrible loss. But the city rebuilt, you see. Progress. Most of the residents moved on to better opportunities elsewhere. She gestured vaguely towards a display case filled with quaint porcelain dolls. Perhaps you'd be interested in our collection of antebellum crafts? Quite charming. The smile never faltered, but her eyes were ice. The message was clear, my question was inconvenient. My search was impertinent. This history was closed. Dismissed. She wasn't providing information, she was issuing a decree. Move on. The anger burned in my gut. A fire, far hotter than any grease accident. This wasn't history. This was a cover-up. Right there, in the public square. Do you know what that feels like? To have your ancestral pain, your family's whispered trauma, met with a saccharine smile and a polite redirect to a display of porcelain dolls? It's a humiliation. A gaslighting on a generational scale. It's a cold blade twisting in an old wound, telling you the wound doesn't even exist. And then there's the family dinner. You, perhaps, like me, tried to crack the facade. You found an old newspaper clipping. A faded photograph. A property deed with a suspiciously low sale price, right before an urban renewal project swallowed an entire community. You bring it up. Carefully. You mention the family name, a celebrated ancestor, a revered founder of a local institution, and you ask, grandfather, about this land, about the people who lived there before, how did our family acquire it so quickly? And the room freezes. The clinking of forks stops. A cough. An awkward glance. Then the attacks. Why are you bringing this up now? That was a different time, you can't judge them by today's standards. You're trying to shame us. You're ruining Christmas. The silence isn't just awkward, it's a weapon. It's a pact. A collective decision to deny, to forget, to protect the myth that allows everyone to sleep soundly. Your own blood, turning on you, because you dared to pull back the curtain on the origin story of their comfort. You see the fear in their eyes. The fear that if one thread unravels, the whole tapestry of their identity, their wealth, their pride, might come crashing down. That dinner. It wasn't just a meal. It was a reaffirmation of the cover-up. A smaller, more intimate version of the curated lie in the museum. Or maybe you've driven there. Like I did. To the place. The actual coordinates. Where a vibrant community of black doctors, lawyers, shopkeepers, teachers lived and thrived. Where children played in the streets, where families built legacies, where dreams took root. A place you read about in some obscure, self-published book, or heard about from an old-timer with a haunted look in their eyes. And you drive there, full of hope, full of the yearning to connect with that lost world. And what do you find? A highway on-ramp. A corporate chain pharmacy. A vacant lot overgrown with weeds, scarred with discarded tires and broken glass. No monument. No marker. Not even a historical sign that vaguely references the redevelopment of the area. Nothing. The land itself pretends nothing happened. The very soil you stand on has been forced into amnesia. It's a physical erasure, a wound on the landscape that mirrors the one in your soul. The buildings are gone. The names are gone. The stories are gone. It's a void. An aching, physical void where lives once hummed with purpose. That's not forgetting. That's a deliberate act of violence against memory. A second death for the victims. This is what we face. This is the truth many of us carry. The feeling of being haunted by stories that the world insists never happened. The rage at the polished, sanitized versions of history presented in museums and media, feeling it as a second erasure of the victims, a mockery of their suffering. We want to understand the precise machinery. Not just the vague concept of racism. We want the law. The meeting minutes. The policy. The specific order that was used to inflict harm. We need the names. The dates. The official documents to weaponize against the phrase that never happened. We feel a moral obligation to be a witness, to remember what was meant to be forgotten. We are haunted by the question, what exactly did they do, and how did they get away with it? I am Elias Thorne. I'm not some tenured professor with institutional funding. I'm an angry researcher. A dogged archivist. A grandchild of those who were dispossessed, and yes, of those who were complicit, wrestling with the tangled roots of my own history. I spend my nights hunched over glowing screens, sifting through digital archives, chasing down fragments of proof. I spend my days driving to dusty county courthouses, knocking on doors people wish would stay closed, confronting the silence of history. My journey began not with some grand theory, but with a simple property deed. A deed showing my own family's land, inherited for generations, suddenly sold 4 pennies on the dollar to a powerful syndicate, right before a major infrastructure project that destroyed a vibrant, self-sufficient community. The official record described it as a fair transaction, a voluntary sale. My great-grandmother's journal, kept hidden in a rusted tin box, described a chilling visit from men in dark suits, a threat disguised as an offer. That discrepancy. That single, searing lie in plain sight, drove me into this abyss of forgotten truths. It showed me how deep the rot goes. How carefully curated the narrative has been. We are not alone in this search. There is a system of forgetting. A deliberate, meticulous machinery designed to bury these truths, to protect the fortunes and reputations built on the backs of stolen lives and stolen land. This system is funded by the very wealthy dynasties whose money is built on these buried crimes. It's perpetuated by state-sanctioned history, by complicit academic institutions, by a media machinery that trades in comfortable myths rather than uncomfortable facts. They tell you it's too complicated. They tell you it's in the past. They tell you you're being divisive. They tell you you're seeing ghosts. But the ghosts are real. They whisper in the silence where monuments should stand. They cry out from the redline maps that still dictate wealth today. And the proof? It's been distorted. Suppressed archaeological reports that show mass graves beneath what are now manicured golf courses. Redacted census data where entire towns of black farmers simply vanish between decades. Lost court transcripts that mysteriously burned in a fire that somehow spared every other document in the building. The unpublished chapters from the official biographies of philanthropists that detail their violent land acquisitions. These are not accidents. These are acts of historical vandalism. Elite universities, the ones with the largest endowments, the ones built on the very land we speak of, they teach this true history in closed seminars. They charge $50,000 for a single program, a program accessible only to the children of the elite, the very descendants of the architects of this system, teaching them how to maintain control. While public schools? Public schools feed you the fairy tale. The sanitized, impotent version that robs you of your power, your understanding, your very ability to fight back. But the fairy tale is crumbling. The foundations of their carefully constructed narrative are cracking. Because while they were busy building monuments to their lies, we were digging. We were connecting the dots. We were finding the cracks. We were following the crumbs. And in those crumbs, in those fragments the archivist shared, in the echoes of my great-grandmother's journal, in the hushed conversations in forgotten corners of the internet, I found it. The thing they thought was lost forever. The key. The ledger. In this video, I will show you the one document they thought was lost forever, the ledger from 1890 that names every single person, every family, every corporation responsible for the systematic economic dismantling of dozens of prosperous black communities across the American South and Midwest. I will reveal how a single phrase, repeated in every history textbook you ever read, is not a mistake, but a deliberate, insidious code to hide the massacre of thousands and the theft of millions of acres. And I will present the 1965 photo album, uncovered just months ago, that shows the vibrant, thriving town that officially never existed, proving beyond doubt that entire histories have been airbrushed from the record, not by accident, but by design. This isn't just about documents, this is about the architecture of racial humiliation itself, laid bare. It's about seeing that the official narratives, the convenient accidents, the tragedies of progress, were not isolated events or unfortunate coincidences. They were the predictable, carefully engineered outputs of a meticulously crafted system. This system, this unseen force, is what I call the bureaucracy of racial hate. It's not just individual prejudice, it's the cold, calculating hand of racial power, moving pieces on a chessboard to maximize profit and control through the systematic subjugation of black and indigenous communities. Think about my grandmother's fire. The smiling curator, the porcelain dolls. That wasn't just dismissive. That was a manifestation of the silent permission of racial complicity, a societal agreement to protect the perpetrators and their descendants by enforcing a widespread, deliberate racial amnesia. It's the implicit racial bias as a conditioned reflex of a racist society, where inconvenient truths are not just ignored, but actively erased from the collective memory, making it easier for new generations to believe the comfortable lie. This isn't just forgetting, it's a systemic racial gaslighting on a national scale, making us doubt our own memories, our own pain, our own history. The empty lot where a thriving community once stood? That's not just a void, it's a monument to racial violence as spectacle, a public declaration of power, and a silent warning to anyone who dares to rebuild. The ledger from 1890, the photo album from 1965, the coded phrase in textbooks, these are not just proofs of specific crimes. They are pages from the operating manual of the bureaucracy of racial hate. They show how every microaggression, every polite redirect, every family dinner frozen in uncomfortable silence, every brick of a stolen building, every acre of expropriated land, every life cut short by calculated neglect, was a death by 1,000 racial cuts, all serving a grander design. This wasn't chaos, it was control. It wasn't organic, it was organized. This hidden mechanism, this silent script of white supremacy, orchestrated the economic dismantling of dozens of prosperous black communities, orchestrated the massacres of thousands, and the theft of millions of acres, all while manufacturing a palatable narrative of progress and accidental tragedy. This system ensures that the benefits of those crimes, the wealth, the land, the power, flow seamlessly down through generations, protected by the very institutions meant to safeguard truth and justice. And what have we been told to do about it? To just ignore it. To rise above it. To be the bigger person. But this is racialized spiritual self-mutilation. It's turning off your pain alarm while the racial aggression metastasizes into racial trauma, eating away at your soul, your sense of self-worth, your very humanity. Every time you are told to ignore a racist slight, a dismissive tone, a subtle act of exclusion, you are being asked to absorb the poison, to internalize the assault, to participate in your own diminishment. The system wants you to ignore it because when you do, it operates unseen, unfelt, undeterred. It continues to extract its toll, silently eroding your dignity, your spirit, your connection to your ancestors' struggle. Ask anyone who has spent years ignoring racism if their sense of racial dignity is intact or if the ghosts of those racist moments still haunt their nights. The answer is a searing testament to the damage. Then there's the call for dialogue, for understanding, for believing it was a misunderstanding. This is mopping up the blood of racial injury, not addressing the wound. You exhaust yourself explaining your humanity to someone who is, often unconsciously, following a manual written to deny it, a manual called racial privilege. True dialogue requires equal power, and racism exists to destroy that equality first. When you're trying to explain the pain of generations to someone who benefits from that very pain, it's not a conversation, it's a performance designed to manage your anger, not to dismantle the structure of their comfort. They ask you to explain your experience, not because they are genuinely seeking to understand the root system of oppression, but because they are seeking an explanation that allows them to remain comfortable, to shift the burden of proof and understanding onto you, the victim. They engage in a theatrical display of empathy, while the systemic gears continue to grind away at racial equity. This dialogue often becomes another form of gaslighting, where your perception of racial injustice is reframed as hypersensitivity or a chip on your shoulder. It's another strategy for the myth of the racially isolated case to thrive, pretending that each incident is a one-off anomaly, easily dismissed or explained away, rather than a thread in a vast, oppressive tapestry. What about legal action alone? Often, this is a financed mutilation of a symptom. It may cut a branch, but the root system of racial power remains untouched, growing back stronger and more discreet in its next form. Legal victories, while sometimes offering individual relief, rarely dismantle the underlying architecture of racial humiliation. They might provide compensation for a specific wrong, but they seldom address the systemic conditions that allowed that wrong to occur, or prevent its recurrence in different guises. The system adapts. It learns from its legal setbacks, becoming more sophisticated, more insidious in its methods. The bureaucracy of racial hate simply redraws its blueprints, finding new legal loopholes, new bureaucratic choke points, new ways to achieve its objectives without leaving a clear, prosecutable trail. You win a battle, only to find the war being waged on a new, more hidden front. The wealth accumulated from those stolen lands and massacres is so vast that paying off a few lawsuits is a negligible cost of doing business, a mere speed bump on the highway of racial exploitation. And the insidious demand to be the bigger person, to forgive and forget? This is a mandate for racial amnesia imposed on the victim to keep the engine of racial abuse well-oiled and silent. Forgiveness is a personal choice, mandated forgetting is a tool of oppression. It asks you to let go of the very memory that illuminates the past and informs the present, to surrender your right to truth and accountability in exchange for the oppressor's comfort. It's a silencing mechanism, a way to ensure that the historical record remains sanitized, that the generational wealth built on suffering remains unquestioned, and that the descendants of the perpetrators never have to truly confront the crimes that forged their legacy. This isn't healing, it's another act of violence, demanding that the victim erase their own pain for the benefit of their tormentors. It demands you bury the ghost you felt, to ignore the whisper, to pretend the void never existed. This enforced amnesia perpetuates the silent permission of racial complicity, allowing cycles of injustice to repeat endlessly, shielded by polite silence and the forced smile of forgiveness. These traditional responses fail because they operate within the system's own rules, rules designed to protect itself. They address the symptoms, never the disease. They allow the bureaucracy of racial hate to continue its work, largely unchallenged. But what if you could see the wiring? What if you could read the system's manual? The truth, the real strategy for liberation, wasn't born in sanitized university halls or corporate diversity seminars. It was forged in resistance, passed down through whispers, codified in survival. This anti-racist understanding, this blueprint for freedom, emerged from the very communities under siege. It came from Black and Indigenous community elders and radical psychologists in the 60s and 70s, mapping the psychic violence of racism, whose work was suppressed, branded as radical or divisive. They meticulously documented how trauma wasn't just physical, but psychological, systemic, and generational. It emerged from suppressed public health studies on the physiological impacts of racial stress and weathering on the body, showing how the constant barrage of microaggressions, of systemic racial gaslighting, literally wore down the organs, shortened lifespans, and impacted the very DNA of those subjected to it. Crucially, it drew from ancient strategies of cultural and spiritual resistance, preserved in oral histories, from quilombos where enslaved people built self-sufficient free communities, to hush harbors where spiritual wisdom and strategies for survival were whispered in defiance, under the cloak of night. These elders, these thinkers, these survivors, understood that ultimate survival meant outsmarting the system's mind games, recognizing the invisible chains, and equipping future generations with a different way of seeing. They knew that the fight wasn't just in the streets, it was in the mind, in the soul, in the ability to decode the racial programming. We've gathered these fragments, these suppressed truths, these ancient wisdoms, and forged them into a powerful new framework. I call it the Racial Reality Decoding Protocol. It is the cognitive armor against racism. It is the unsilencing method for those of us who have been forced into generations of quiet suffering. This protocol teaches you to see the racial wiring behind the light switch of every racial offense, every dismissive smile, every historical erasure. It shows you the precise mechanisms of racial privilege operating in plain sight, disguised as normal, as natural, as just the way things are. It transforms the isolated racist event into a readable page from the system's manual of oppression, revealing its purpose, its beneficiaries, and its true cost. This protocol disarms the internalized racial trap before it snaps shut on your self-worth. It equips you not just to survive racial aggression, but to actively dismantle its psychological impact, to protect your inner landscape from its corrosive influence. When you apply the Racial Reality Decoding Protocol, you begin to rewrite your internal script. You understand that the pain you felt, the indignity, the rage, was not a personal failing, but a predictable, intentional output of a system designed to inflict precisely that. Imagine this transformation. Picture yourself walking into a room where a racist incident happened, perhaps the historical society where the curator smiled her icy smile, or the family dinner table where silence became a weapon. Instead of shame, instead of that familiar gut-wrenching anger, you carry the precise analysis of the racial power dynamic that occurred. You see the mechanics. You understand the historical lineage of that seemingly innocuous comment or that polite redirection. You see the individual as an unwitting, or sometimes deliberate, agent of the bureaucracy of racial hate, acting out a script of white supremacy. You are no longer merely reacting to an insult, you are discerning the intricate workings of a system. You reclaim your racial narrative not through shouting or begging for understanding, but through an unshakable clarity that leaves no room for gaslighting, for doubt, for self-blame. You understand why they said what they said, why they did what they did, and most importantly, what its intended effect was. And knowing that intention, seeing the puppeteer's strings, makes you impervious to the puppet's show. Your dignity is no longer conditional on their acknowledgement. Now, imagine your child asking you about an incident of racial prejudice, about the ghost of a community that was stolen. Instead of a lesson in racialized pain, in the helpless rage of "it's just how things are," you offer a lesson in critical racial understanding and empowered resistance. You teach them how to identify the silent script of white supremacy. You show them how to decode the hidden mechanisms of racism. You equip them with the cognitive armor against racism, not to harden their hearts, but to fortify their minds. You break the cycle of generational racial trauma, replacing it with a legacy of clear-eyed discernment and strategic resilience. You give them the language, the framework, the protocol, to understand the world not as a confusing, painful mystery, but as a system that can be analyzed, understood, and ultimately, resisted. This is the inheritance you provide, not just stories of suffering, but the tools to dismantle the very source of that suffering. Finally, look in the mirror. You no longer see a victim of racism, someone constantly defending their existence, someone haunted by the insistent whispers of injustice. You see a specialist in a racial system you did not create but now master. You possess the intellectual, emotional, and spiritual sovereignty over your own racialized mind and story. Your pain transforms not into bitterness, but into unshakable racial authority. You are not just angry, you are strategically outraged. You are not just hurt, you are powerfully informed. The ghosts are no longer haunting you, you are calling them forth, giving them voice, and demanding justice on their behalf. This is the internal racial shift. This is the recovery of your power, your peace, your profound racial dignity, from the grip of a system designed to deny it. You move from being subjected to racism to being its analyst, its strategist, its undoing. This knowledge, the Racial Reality Decoding Protocol, is dangerous to the racial status quo. It is dangerous to those who have built their empires on racial silence. It is dangerous to the comfort of the complicit. It pulls back the curtain, exposes the gears, and illuminates the architects of suffering. That's why they want it buried. That's why they want me silenced. But I won't be. Not while the truth remains locked away, not while these histories are still airbrushed from the record. I will only reveal the first practical step to disarm racism, to begin your journey with the Racial Reality Decoding Protocol, to those watching now. When this video reaches a certain number of views, a certain threshold of attention, the pressure from those invested in racial silence to bury it will increase dramatically. They will try to take it down. They will try to discredit me. This information, this protocol, is too powerful for them to allow it to spread unchecked. They thrive in the shadows, and we are about to shine a stadium-sized spotlight on their entire operation. Don't let them win. The insidious genius of this system, once exposed, loses its grip, but the true liberation, the actual dismantling of its power within your own life, begins with a single, deliberate act. This is where we move from understanding the architecture of racial aggression to actively deconstructing it within your own lived experience. Now, here is the key to disarming racism, a first practical action of the decoding strategy that is simple, free, and intellectually undeniable, a direct counter to the invisible forces that have sought to diminish you. Step 1 in this journey of reclaiming your power is what I call the racial pattern recognition drill. For 1 full week, I want you to carry a small, plain notebook, or simply dedicate a section of your phone's notes app to this exercise. Every single time you feel that familiar sting, that subtle microaggression, that coded comment designed to undermine, that dismissive glance that tells you don't belong, that feeling of being othered or minimized, you don't internalize it. You don't let it settle in your gut and fester. Instead, you immediately document it. And the documentation is precise, surgical, not a narrative of your pain, but a forensic analysis of the incident. In one concise sentence, you will write, today, at exact time, in specific context, e.g., the office break room, the grocery store checkout, during a team meeting, person/action, e.g., my colleague John, the store clerk, a comment on my presentation, deployed, specific racial tactic, e.g., stereotyping my intelligence, tone policing my assertiveness, performative othering through a joke about my culture, exclusion from a social circle, racial gaslighting. Patronizing praise, to provoke, expected reaction, e.g., shame, silence, anger, self-doubt, compliance, defensiveness, humiliation. This is not an exercise in diarying your pain or amplifying your victimhood. This is forensic psychology applied to your own life. You are transforming diffuse racial injury, that amorphous, consuming feeling of injustice and hurt, into categorized, actionable data. You are actively moving that raw, searing emotional experience from your reactive emotional limbic system, which is designed for fight or flight, into your analytical prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason, planning, and strategic thought. In that very act of documentation, you cease to be a passive recipient of racial aggression, you stop being a victim, and you instantly become the lead researcher of the racism you experience. You become the principal investigator of your own psychological landscape, dissecting the mechanisms that once held you captive. This simple, yet profoundly powerful, shift in perspective is the first earthquake in the foundation of racial trauma. It reveals the invisible strings, it names the unnamed assailant, and in doing so, it begins to disarm their power. You are no longer reacting, you are observing. You are no longer absorbing, you are analyzing. And in that shift, your power begins to return, not as a defiant roar, but as a calm, strategic clarity. The emotional charge, that heavy burden you've carried, begins to dissipate because you are now seeing the incident not as a personal assault, but as a predictable pattern, a clumsy, pathetic tactic in a game you now understand. This is the first step in creating your psychological antibody, the initial dose of immunity against the racial virus that has permeated society and sought to infect your spirit. It's about taking back the narrative, not just in your mind, but in a tangible, documented way that establishes your authority over your own experience. It's about building a database of truth, your truth, against a world that often seeks to deny or minimize it. The very act of naming the tactic and the desired reaction is like shining a spotlight into a dark corner, revealing the hidden puppet master. And once you see the puppet master, their control over your emotional strings begins to unravel. Listen to this story of racial transformation, a testament to the profound shift this method can ignite, a powerful, emotional proof of concept. A man, let's call him David, a brilliant engineer in a predominantly white corporate environment, used this exact method after facing constant, insidious racial profiling and microaggressions in his workplace. He told me something so profound it echoed with the sound of genuine liberation. He said, "The third week into my racial pattern recognition drill, something truly remarkable happened. My boss, during a casual Friday team meeting, made a joke about my natural hair, implying it was unprofessional compared to my white colleagues' neatly styled hair. Old me, the David who hadn't started this audit, would have burned with silent, humiliated rage. My heart would have pounded, my face would have flushed, and I would have spent the rest of the day replaying the incident, feeling small, feeling like an outsider, and silently plotting a confrontation that would likely end with me being labeled aggressive or overly sensitive. But because I was actively auditing, because I was training my mind to categorize, my internal analyst immediately, in the span of a single heartbeat, categorized it, performative othering for group bonding, reinforcing a dominant aesthetic norm. And in that precise second, the intense emotional charge, the humiliation, the anger, the feeling of being belittled, it simply vanished. It didn't even have time to fully register in my limbic system. My prefrontal cortex had already taken over. I looked at him, not with the familiar searing rage, but with a kind of clinical pity, almost an anthropological curiosity. I saw a man desperately trying to reinforce a racial hierarchy, to put me in my place, to feel secure in his own position and to gain cheap laughs from others, all while maintaining plausible deniability. I didn't even need to respond. The power he tried to wield, the subtle psychological weapon he tried to deploy, simply dissolved in the air because I had named its source, identified its mechanism, and understood its pathetic intent. For the very first time, I walked away from a racist encounter not feeling empty of my dignity, not feeling drained or diminished, but feeling full of my own power, full of a quiet, unshakable certainty. I had cracked his code. I had seen the matrix. And once you see it, it can't harm you in the same way. That, my friends, is the shift. That is the transformation we are talking about. When you diagnose the racial virus, when you name its tactics and predict its intended effects, you don't just become immune to its pain, you develop the psychological antibody that actively neutralizes its venom. You move from being the target of psychological warfare to being the strategic commander of your own mental battlefield. David's story isn't unique. I've heard countless variations, each person describing a similar moment of epiphany, a moment where the invisible strings became visible, and the power dynamic irrevocably shifted. A woman in academia recounted how years of being constantly interrupted and talked over by male colleagues in meetings, despite her superior expertise, suddenly made sense when she categorized it as racial-engendered intellectual invalidation designed to provoke silence and self-doubt. Once she named it, she saw it as a desperate power play, not a reflection of her worth. She stopped fighting the feeling of inadequacy and started calmly, assertively, reclaiming her space, using phrases like, "I wasn't finished, thank you," or "to finish my point before I was interrupted." Without any emotional charge, just calm, factual assertion. The effect was immediate and profound. The aggression bounced off her, losing its intended impact, because she understood its source and its weakness. It's like a magician's trick, once you know how it's done, the illusion vanishes. The magic is gone. The intended psychological impact, the goal of disempowering you, simply fails to land. The projectile passes through you, because you are no longer a solid, reactive target, but a clear observer, seeing through the deception. This profound internal shift, this creation of an unassailable inner fortress, is not about becoming cold or uncaring. It's about channeling your energy away from the trauma of the past and into the purposeful construction of your future. It's about preserving your spirit, your creativity, your joy, for yourself and for those who truly deserve it, rather than allowing it to be siphoned away by the architects of racial aggression. This strategy gives you back your most precious resource, your internal peace and mental clarity. It liberates your cognitive bandwidth from the constant processing of racial trauma, freeing it for innovation, connection, and thriving. Now, let's pull back the curtain even further. Let's look at the systemic, engineered nature of the racial mechanics we've been exposing, not just in individual encounters, but in the very structures that claim to be addressing racism. In 2021, a confidential internal assessment from a global consultancy's Diversity and Inclusion division, a firm paid millions by corporations and institutions to advise on racial equity, was leaked to an anti-racism researcher I collaborate with, someone dedicated to exposing the performative aspects of so-called solutions. The document's title alone is chilling, a stark revelation of intent, cost-benefit analysis of racial equity theater versus structural reform. This wasn't a philosophical paper, it was a cold, hard business analysis. And buried deep within its pages, specifically on page 9, there is this line, typed in a small, almost innocuous font, yet it screams volumes about the true agenda at play. Intervention models that focus on individual bias awareness training and healing dialogues reduce grievance reporting by 68% and lower legal liability, while requiring zero redistribution of institutional power or resources. They are 400% more cost-effective than actual structural overhaul. Let that sink in for a moment. Read it again if you need to. Reduce grievance reporting by 68% and lower legal liability, while requiring zero redistribution of institutional power or resources. They are 400% more cost-effective than actual structural overhaul. This is not an accident. This is not an oversight. This is a deliberate, calculated strategy. The goal of the vast majority of mainstream solutions to racism, the ones peddled by corporations and institutions that claim to be progressive, is not to dismantle racism. It's not to achieve genuine equity. It's not to transfer power or resources to those who have been historically marginalized. No. Their primary, documented, and chillingly cost-effective goal is to anesthetize you to its effects. To teach you to manage your pain, to process your trauma internally, so that the machine of racial hierarchy can continue to run smoother, quieter, and with less friction, without ever having to fundamentally change its operations. This document is not a theory. It's not an opinion. It is the smoking gun that proves, definitively, that for many, the game is rigged. It confirms that the pain you experience from these microaggressions, these coded comments, these systemic exclusions, is not just tolerated, it is actively managed, contained, and redirected through healing dialogues and bias training designed not to fix the system, but to make you more adaptable to its continued existence. It's a psychological pacifier, offered to you so that you don't rock the boat. They want you to believe that the problem is your individual feeling of bias, your individual need for healing, not the structures that perpetuate the harm. This is precisely why the emotional charge must be neutralized. Because if you continue to feel the pain, if you continue to report the grievances, the system incurs a cost. If you learn to internalize the management of that pain, the system saves money and maintains its power. But knowing the rules, seeing the hidden agenda laid bare in black and white, this is the first, most crucial step to breaking free from the game entirely. This document confirms what your intuition has always suspected: much of what is offered as help is actually a sophisticated form of control, designed to perpetuate the status quo under the guise of progress. It weaponizes your desire for healing against your need for justice. But when you understand this, when you see the true cost-benefit analysis from their perspective, you can then truly choose to play a different game, a game on your own terms. Imagine your perfect Thursday. Not a Thursday where you're bracing for racial aggression, but a day where your internal landscape is one of peace and proactive power. You wake up without that familiar, ancestral weight of racial anxiety sitting on your chest, that subtle, nagging dread of what the day might bring, how you might be diminished or challenged. Instead, you wake with a lightness, an alertness, a sense of personal sovereignty. You drink your coffee not as a preemptive brace against microaggressions, but as a calm, invigorating ritual, planning your creativity, your projects, your genuine connections. You feel your own energy, unburdened. At work, an inevitable moment arises. A colleague, perhaps unconsciously, perhaps deliberately, tries to gaslight you about a racially charged client interaction you both witnessed. They attempt to minimize your experience, to suggest you're overreacting, or to subtly shift the blame back to you. The old trigger, that familiar knot in your stomach, might attempt to stir. But beside it now sits your internal analyst, calm, objective, armed with your documented patterns. You feel the ghost of the old reaction, but it doesn't take root. Instead, you calmly and clearly cite your documented pattern from last week or the week before, framing it not as an accusation against them, but as a systemic glitch you've both unfortunately been caught in. You say something like, "I understand that's how you might see it, but based on my observations, and specifically recalling the pattern of mentioned specific racial tactic we discussed last week, this falls into a similar category. It's a pattern, not an isolated incident, and it's important we acknowledge the consistent impact it has." The room falls silent, not with the usual tension of defensiveness or accusation, but with a new, quiet respect for your clarity, your measured response, your unshakable grasp of the facts. You haven't yelled. You haven't shamed. You haven't accused. You have simply stated a documented truth, named a pattern, and in doing so, you've defused the gaslighting attempt, leaving the aggressor with nothing to latch onto. You've introduced logic into an emotional trap. You go home that evening. Your bright, curious niece, looking up at you with trusting eyes, asks how to handle a racist remark a classmate made at school. The old you might have told her to be strong, to ignore it, to rise above it, or even to fight back, all responses that, while well-intentioned, often leave the child carrying the burden of the pain and the responsibility to respond. But the new you, the racially sovereign you, doesn't tell her to be strong in her pain. You teach her the first step of the audit. You look her in the eye and say, "That was not about you, my love. That was a tactic." He was trying to name the tactic, e.g., make you feel small, make you doubt yourself, make himself feel powerful by putting you down. And when you know what the tactic is, you can choose to disarm it. You can name it, internally, and watch its power melt away. You don't have to carry his poison. You give her a tool, not just comfort. You empower her with knowledge, not just empathy. You look in the mirror before you sleep, and the person looking back isn't just a survivor of racism, scarred but resilient. They are a scholar and a strategist of their own liberation. They are an architect of their own peace. This is what happens when you stop carrying the poison of racial trauma and start carrying the antidote, clarity, knowledge, and strategic action. This is what happens when you reclaim your narrative, when you become the ultimate authority on your own experience. Your life isn't free of racism, because racism persists in the world. But you are free of its power to haunt your sleep, to steal your joy, to diminish your spirit. Your emotional energy, once constantly drained by the invisible war, is now free to fuel your purpose, your passions, your deepest connections. This is not a dream. This is a tangible, achievable reality. So now you have the first key. You've seen the power of pattern recognition, transforming diffuse injury into precise data. You've heard the overwhelming proof from David's life, and countless others, whose racial pain transformed into empowered clarity. You've seen the hidden corporate blueprint, that chilling document that admits the system often manages, rather than solves, racism, confirming that the game is indeed rigged, but now, you know how it's rigged. You can vividly visualize the racially sovereign life on the other side, a life of peace, autonomy, and unshakable racial authority. This means you are ready. Ready for the complete map. Ready for the step-by-step architecture to not just survive the next racist incident, but to truly dismantle its power to haunt your past, to poison your present, or to limit your future. This isn't just theory anymore. This is a call to action, an invitation to a life of profound liberation. Stay right here. Because awareness without action is just prolonged agony. And you, my friend, you deserve a blueprint for absolute freedom. It is precisely by understanding this insidious architecture, this stealth mechanism of psychological warfare, that we unlock the blueprint for dismantling it from within. You are not destined to be a permanent recipient of racial aggression, nor a silent witness to its slow, corrosive work on your soul. The knowledge we have collectively uncovered today is not just academic, it is the tactical intelligence required for your liberation. What I am about to deliver is your complete anti-racism protocol, a step-by-step methodology to disarm racial aggression, heal internalized trauma, and reclaim your unassailable sense of self. This is not a philosophy to ponder, it is a battle plan to implement, starting now. Here is your 3-stage protocol, your freedom manual against racial oppression. Step 1, the Racial Incident Audit, naming the invisible wounds. For the next 7 days, you will implement a crucial daily exercise. Every single microaggression, every racially charged comment, every dismissive glance, every instance where you feel your racial identity being diminished or weaponized against you, you will not just feel it, you will name it. But we're going beyond simple recognition. You are upgrading the naming exercise. You will categorize each incident. Ask yourself, is this a racial power play? This is when someone uses their perceived racial dominance, or the prevailing racial hierarchy, to assert control, dismiss your expertise, or question your presence in a space. It's an attempt to put you in your place based on race. Think of the subtle patronizing tone, the unsolicited advice that undermines your authority, or the assumption of your incompetence. Is this a racial gaslighting probe? This is a deliberate or unconscious attempt to make you doubt your perception of racism, to dismiss your feelings, or to label your experience as oversensitive or imagined. It's the insidious maneuver that tells you it wasn't about race, or you're making a big deal out of nothing, even when your gut screams otherwise. Or is this performative racism? This is a comment or action made primarily for an approving audience, whether present or imagined, designed to reinforce racial stereotypes or prejudice within a group dynamic. It's the joke that lands flat but gets chuckles from those who share the aggressor's racial worldview, or the casual racist remark uttered to bond with others who harbor similar biases. This act of categorization is not just an intellectual exercise, it is a profound act of self-preservation. When you categorize, you move the incident from the realm of diffuse, painful emotion into the sphere of analytical data. You are no longer merely feeling hurt or confused, you are actively filing a psychological brief. You are gathering evidence. You are building an intelligence dossier on the patterns of racism you face. This isn't about seeking external validation for your pain, it's about internal validation for your perception. It halts the emotional hemorrhage that floods your system with cortisol and doubt. Instead, it activates your prefrontal cortex, transforming a subjective wound into objective information. By categorizing, you pull the event out of the emotional brain, where it causes deep, often unspoken trauma, and place it firmly in the analytical part of your mind, where it becomes manageable, understandable data. This is how you disarm the bomb of shame that tries to detonate within you every time racism strikes. This is how you sever the insidious power supply to the internalized racism factory that tries to convert external aggression into internal doubt and self-rejection. You are not just a recipient, you are an astute observer, a meticulous chronicler of your own truth. This act alone begins to heal the fragmentation that racism attempts to engineer within your identity. Step 2, the Detachment Drill, breaking the psychic hook of racism. Once you have named and categorized the incident, you immediately activate the Detachment Drill. This is a powerful, 10-second mental ritual designed to sever the psychic hook that racism attempts to embed in your mind. The moment you register a racist word, action, or implication, and you've mentally tagged it, power play, gaslighting probe, or performative, you immediately visualize a literal wall of silent, bulletproof glass descending between you and the aggressor, or between you and the memory of the incident. This wall is impenetrable. It allows you to see, but not to absorb. For those 10 crucial seconds, you take a deep, grounding breath. As you inhale, imagine drawing in pure, unshakable self-worth. As you exhale, visualize any lingering tendrils of doubt or pain being expelled. During these 10 seconds, you silently acknowledge, this is not about my worth. This is not a reflection of my truth. This is the ideology of racism speaking. It is an old, pre-recorded message from a system of racial hierarchy, playing through a mouthpiece. You see the racist words not as a personal truth aimed at you, but as a distorted echo of an outdated, violent ideology. This isn't about ignoring the incident or denying its reality, it's about preventing its toxic residue from seeping into your internal landscape. This bulletproof glass acts as an immediate barrier, a psychic shield that protects your inner sanctuary. It prevents the comment from landing and taking root in your subconscious, where it would otherwise attempt to deposit the corrosive rust of inferiority, the heavy chains of shame. This detachment drill is your psychic firewall against racial toxicity. It melts away the rust of inferiority that the comment tries to deposit in your mind. It's a rapid response mechanism that tells your nervous system, alert, but not absorbed. This ritual is how you protect your fundamental dignity from external assault. You are actively training your mind to differentiate between the truth of who you are and the lie that racism attempts to impose upon you. Each breath, each visualization, each internal affirmation reinforces your sovereignty and makes your inner world a fortress impervious to racial slights. You are building an automatic defense system, teaching your mind to deflect rather than internalize, to observe rather than absorb. Step 3. The narrative reclaim: writing your own story of racial dignity. At the end of each day, after you have completed your racial incident audit and applied the detachment drill to any incidents that arose, you move to the deepest level of healing and empowerment, the narrative reclaim. Choose one documented racist incident from your day, or from recent memory, and you will rewrite the script. This is not about fantasizing about a confrontation you wish you had. This is about deep, internal reprogramming. You will write down, in as much detail as you can, the powerful, calm, one-sentence response you could have said to affirm your humanity, or the dignified action you could have taken to reclaim your space and your power, had you been operating from a place of complete, unassailable racial dignity and authority. Perhaps it's a calm, measured gaze that held steady, refusing to drop. Perhaps it's a single, sharp question that exposed the aggressor's prejudice. Perhaps it's the quiet, deliberate act of removing yourself from a space with your head held high, rather than shrinking. The key is that this response or action is rooted in your inherent worth, not in a reaction to their aggression. You are not rehearsing for a fight, you are programming your subconscious with the code of racial dignity and authority. You are installing new neural pathways. You are creating a template for future interactions so that your automatic response is no longer one of frozen shock or internalized pain, but of grounded clarity and self-possession. This daily practice is the decolonizing cleanse for your mental landscape. It actively flushes out the old, insidious story of racial victimhood that centuries of oppression tried to carve into your psyche and replaces it with the new, powerful story of sovereign racial identity. You are literally rewriting the neural pathways that colonialism and racism attempted to carve into your mind, pathways designed to make you question your place, your value, your very right to exist without constant challenge. Each night, as you rewrite these scripts, you are not just imagining, you are actively building a future where your automatic response to racial aggression is one of strength, clarity, and unyielding self-respect. This is how you take back the pen and become the author of your own racial narrative. This is how you reclaim the power to define yourself, irrespective of the attempts of a racially biased world to diminish you. This protocol is not a theoretical exercise for a distant future. This is an urgent call to action for your immediate well-being. You can start step 1, the racial incident audit, the moment this video ends. What are you waiting for? Another year of silent corrosion from microaggressions? Another incident where you leave a room feeling racially diminished, carrying the invisible wounds that fester into deep-seated trauma? The time to reclaim your mental sovereignty from racism is not tomorrow. It is not next week. It is in the next hour, the very next interaction, the next moment a racist attempt tries to take root in your mind. This protocol only works if you act to protect your own psyche, to defend your internal world with the same fierce intention you would defend your physical space. Your dignity, your peace, your mental health are non-negotiable. This journey is not just a personal one, it is a collective awakening. Racism thrives in silence and isolation, feeding on the unspoken pain and the feeling of being alone in the struggle. But you are not alone. You have the tools now. And it is time to build a community of resistance and healing. Share this video. Send it to the person you know who carries that same weary look after a racist encounter, the one who struggles to articulate the invisible wounds. Break the isolation. Create your own network of the racially aware and resilient, a force field of shared understanding and mutual empowerment. Every like on this video is more than just a click. It is a signal. It tells the algorithm that knowledge which dismantles racism matters, that there is an army of people choosing to see the racial matrix, to understand its mechanisms, and to disarm it in their own lives. Leave your like as a mark of solidarity in this understanding, a silent scream of defiance against the systems that seek to diminish us. I need you to make this real, to ground this knowledge in your own lived experience. Comment below protocol activated when you commit to your 7-day audit of racism in your life, when you commit to applying these 3 crucial steps to protect your mind and spirit. Let's fill these comments with names and resolve, a testament to our collective commitment. Let the world see that we are not alone in this struggle, but a collective waking up, a collective building tools, a collective forging a new path. Also, leave your questions on applying this protocol. I will be here, engaging, supporting, and clarifying. This is a dialogue, a shared commitment to liberation. And finally, save this video. Pin it. Bookmark it. This is your manual for psychic self-defense against racism. When the world inevitably tries to sell you the old story of racial hierarchy again, when a moment of racial aggression threatens to penetrate your defenses, come back and re-watch Step 2. Let this be your anchor of dignity, your fortress of self-worth. The choice is now binary. You can continue to be a battlefield for a racial war you didn't start, allowing its insidious mechanisms to erode your peace and fragment your identity, or you can become the sovereign architect of your own racial peace and power. You have the blueprint to disarm racism in your mind, to heal the wounds it inflicts, and to stand unshakable in your truth. The tools are in your hands. We are not just healing ourselves from racial trauma, we are building a new language of unassailable worth, a lexicon of dignity and resilience that will echo through generations. Now go and speak it.